Come back. You know this place? The low fire, the slow hours, the world outside falling away like a coat dropped at the door. If you've wandered these roads with us before, you already know what happens here. Time stretches, the noise fades, and Middle-earth opens not like a book but like a door you forgot you left unlocked. Tonight we're going somewhere darker than usual. But first listen. There is a road in the west of Eriador where the greenway runs like a seam between sleeping fields. The night has gone very quiet. Villages have dimmed their windows. Somewhere far off a dog barked once and then stopped as if it thought better of it. Then comes a sound. High, thin, like a blade of grief drawn slowly through silk. Not loud, not close, not far, just present, threading through the air in a way that sound should not be able to thread. And when it comes, the other sounds of the world simply stop. The creak of a cartwheel, the whisper of wind in the hedges, the rustling of small animals in the dark. All of it goes. What replaces it is cold. A farmer is in the ditch beside his cart. He does not remember climbing down. His body simply made that decision without him, the way an animal bolts for cover when a shadow crosses overhead. He presses his face into the mud and he waits. And while he waits, something moves out of the east. A rider. Black head to heel, not sitting on the horse so much as draped over it, poured down from crown to stirrup like a shape of darkness that borrowed the idea of a man. When its cloak shifts, there is a dull glint beneath. Old male, the color of iron left in rain too long. And when it passes, the cold deepens, not the honest chill of autumn, something else. Something that moves inward past the skin, past the muscle, reaching for the warmth in the bones and quietly stealing it. The horse in the ditch has its eyes rolled white. The rider slows. The hood turns, not fully, not obviously, but toward the ditch, toward the farmhouse, toward the darkness that should be safe and suddenly feels as thin as paper. And the farmer understands with a clarity that has no words that whatever is searching from beneath that hood is not using its eyes. It is searching with something else entirely. Then it moves on. The world exhales. And you, wherever you are right now, whatever light is on around you, you feel it too, don't you? That faint echo of the farmer's dread, because you already know what that rider is. And tonight, we're going to follow it all the way back to the beginning. Settle in, let's find out what made the darkness ride. That cry on the wind has a name. Nazgûl. Ringwraiths, the 9 riders, the black riders, the fell riders. Different names in different tongues, but every single one of them points at the same cold truth, at beings who exist at the intersection of the living world and something older and darker behind it. They are not soldiers, not commanders, not monsters in the simple, manageable sense. They are Saurons will given shape and movement and voice. And here is the question that should unsettle you from the start. If the Nazgûl can be driven back by fire and sunlight, if a ranger's nerve or an elf lord's presence can scatter them, why does the approach of a single ringwraith collapse the courage of men who have stood against orc armies without flinching? Why does one horn call from the Witch King on the Pelennor fields weigh heavier on the hearts of Gondor's soldiers than the sight of siege towers and engines of war? The answer is not about what they do. It is about what they are. They exist in 2 places at once. Partially in the visible world we all share, the world of mud and starlight and drawn swords, and partially in what Tolkien called the unseen realm, a deeper layer of reality where the will of the One Ring exerts its most absolute power. When Frodo slides the ring onto his finger on Weathertop, the world does not vanish. It peels back, and what he sees beneath those black hoods is not emptiness. He sees pale kings, ancient crowns, long hair, cruel faces lit with a hunger that has been burning for 3,000 years. They were not invisible before. We were simply blind. To understand what they became, we have to go back to what they were. Second Age, the world still young enough to believe in its own beauty. Númenor riding the waves, the elven smiths perfecting their art in a region. Men, real men, proud men, men whose words could set thousands moving, ruling kingdoms that stretched from mountain range to coastline. And Sauron walking among them. Not as the Dark Lord, not yet, as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, fair-seeming, honey-tongued, carrying the kind of wisdom that whispers rather than shouts, that approaches from the side rather than head-on, that arrives not with threats but with understanding. He offered 9 rings to 9 of the greatest among men. Not trinkets, not bribes, instruments of power he called them, tools for rulers who already ruled, who already carried the weight of kingdoms on their shoulders and felt, every year, the creeping fear that they would not live long enough to finish what they had built. Think about who these 9 were. One was an Easterling king of formidable strength, whose territory stretched into lands that don't appear on most maps. Some were of Númenórean blood, descendants of the island kingdom, men who already carried greatness in their lineage. Among them were sorcerers, warlords, lords of ancient cities and wide river plains. These were not petty chiefs. These were the sort of men whose deaths would shake entire regions of the world. And Sauron chose them precisely for that reason. Now hold this image, you are one of them, your hair is going gray. Your hands, which were once steady on a sword hilt, sometimes tremble now in the cold. You have enemies on 3 borders, an heir who is not quite ready, and the absolute certainty that you will be dead before you finish what you came here to do. And a stranger comes to your court, wise, elegant, soft-spoken, and sets a ring before you on the table. Wear this, he says, your life will lengthen, your sight will sharpen, your enemies will falter before you, everything you've built will endure. Tell me honestly, could you refuse? They couldn't. And for a long time, a surprisingly long time, the rings delivered exactly what was promised. Their kingdoms flourished, rebellions died before they fully formed, enemies retreated without obvious explanation, plagues faltered at the border, the aging slowed then stopped, decades passed and they remained, a century passed and they remained. It must have felt like winning. But power has a taste, and this power began to taste wrong. Food lost its flavor, laughter echoed strangely as if heard through water, colors seemed less vivid in summer. When they removed the rings, briefly, experimentally, the world felt muffled and they put them back on faster each time. Their horses shied from their hands, servants averted their eyes, their reflections in mirrors seemed somehow thinner as if the glass was beginning to forget them. And then, no great announcement, no dramatic moment, they simply crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Their bodies faded from the visible world entirely. What remained was less a presence than an absence shaped like a man. And in that absence, the One Ring had room to move, to reach into whatever was left of their will and fold it, gently and completely, into Sauron's own. Their names vanished. The proud signatures on ancient treaties, the styles carved into forgotten tombstones, gone. Only titles remained: the Witch King, the Shadow of the East, the Black Captain, hollow crowns on hollow heads. What Sauron had built was not an army. It was a collection of 9 lives completely spent, offered back to the world as something that serves without question and terrifies without limit. But what actually is wraithhood? Not philosophically, practically, what does it mean to exist the way the Nazgûl exist? Tolkien gives us the clearest window into this on Weathertop, through Frodo's eyes when the ring goes on. The world doesn't go dark, it goes transparent. The fire is still there, the broken stones are still there, but the 9 hooded shapes that were formless shadows are suddenly revealed. Pale kings in white, crowned, ancient, terrible, eyes that burn with something very specific, a hunger that has lasted so long it has become structural, built into whatever they are now. The ring didn't make them appear. It pulled Frodo toward them, partway across the border between seen and unseen, just enough for him to stand in their home territory and look around. Because that is where the Nazgûl truly live, in the unseen, in the deeper layer. Which means that what we see when we look at them in the visible world, the robes, the dark horses, the empty hoods, is only the edge of them, a shadow cast by a presence that exists primarily somewhere else. And this half-existence gives them capabilities no ordinary hunter possesses. They don't track footprints in mud, they follow the pressure a living soul exerts on the world. They feel the One Ring not as an object but as a wound in the fabric of reality, blazing, unmistakable, impossible to ignore when you exist primarily in the realm where that wound runs deepest. Distance blunts this sense. Close range sharpens it almost unbearably. Walls don't stop them, darkness doesn't blind them. They are searching with something that has nothing to do with eyes. How do you hide from something that can hear your soul? And there's another dimension to this half-existence that only becomes clear when you consider what happens when you fight them. A sword can cut their robes, an arrow can pierce the space where a body should be, you can even wound the Witch King with an enchanted blade. But the Nazgûl's true being is anchored in that other place, in the unseen where Sauron's will holds them fast. When you fight them in the visible world, you are fighting the edge of something whose center exists elsewhere. No wonder courage runs out before contact is ever made. And here we reach the most important thing to understand about the Nazgûl. Their primary weapon is not a blade. It is what walks ahead of them. Tolkien is explicit about this in the books, in his letters, in every encounter he crafts. Fear goes before the ringwraiths like a herald, not ordinary fear, not the reasonable caution of a soldier who can see what he is facing. A deep structural dread that bypasses thought entirely and speaks directly to the oldest parts of the mind, the parts that remember being prey, the parts that still listen for things in the dark. When the Nazgûl approach, the world contracts. The air grows heavy, sounds dim, and courage doesn't just waver, it drains the way water drains from a cracked vessel, slowly and then all at once. Watch how this plays out in those early chapters. 4 hobbits used to warm fireplaces and second breakfast are walking a country lane, and then there is a black rider in the road. They don't draw weapons, they don't even run. They simply find themselves flat on their faces in the grass, pressed against the earth, holding their breath, making themselves as small as possible. Their bodies made the decision. The rational mind didn't get a vote. That is the terror at work before a single threat has been spoken. On Weathertop it deepens. 5 Nazgûl advancing on 4 exhausted hobbits and 1 ranger under a moonless sky. Even Aragorn, hardened by years of wandering the most dangerous roads in Middle-earth, feels it. Even he describes what he does there not as bravery but as necessity, as the only available response. The difference between him and the hobbits is not that he feels less afraid. It is that he has trained himself to keep moving through the fear long enough to grab a burning brand and charge at something that wants to kill him. And when the Witch King rides before Minas Tirith, when that single figure on that enormous fell beast approaches the great gate of Gondor's most ancient city, trained soldiers with walls behind them and numbers on their side throw down their weapons and run. Not because they made a calculation and decided to retreat, because something in them simply stopped. The capacity to choose resistance extinguished. That is the Nazgûl's first strike, before any blade is raised, before any spell is cast, before they even arrive. And then there is what they leave behind. The Black Breath is not a fighting technique, it is not a spell in any conventional sense. Tolkien describes it as a spiritual and psychological poisoning, something that seeps past armor and past skin and reaches for the will itself. Not a wound to the body, a wound to the desire to exist. Those who fall deepest under the Black Breath don't simply collapse. They retreat to a place between sleep and death, a gray borderland where the world's colors have faded and despair whispers that waking is not worth the trouble. After the Battle of Pelennor Fields, after the most enormous military engagement of the Third Age, the houses of healing in Minas Tirith are full of people who were never touched by a blade. Men who stood within range of the Nazgûl's presence and simply went somewhere far away and couldn't come back. Merry, who helped bring down the Witch King, can barely lift his hand. Eowyn, who actually struck the final blow, lies as if dead, her arm cold, her spirit wandering some gray elsewhere. And healers with herbs and skill and care cannot reach them. Aragorn reaches them. He comes with Athela's Kingsfill and water and something else, a will strong enough to reach into that gray place where theirs has gone and call it back. The room fills with a fragrance like rain on ancient stone, and slowly, painfully, eyes open, not just bodies healed, people recalled. The desire to be here in this world in this moment, rekindled like a flame that had almost gone out. Because that is what the Black Breath actually extinguishes. Not life, not yet the wish for it. Think about that for a moment. An enemy that doesn't need to kill you, that just needs to convince you that continuing is not worth the effort. That leaves you lying in a clean room while people who love you try to bring you back from somewhere you went without deciding to go. Tolkien had seen what that looked like. He had walked through the aftermath of battles where the bodies weren't the hardest part. The hardest part was the men who were still breathing, still present, still technically alive but unreachable. Shell-shocked, they called it then. The names have changed, the experience hasn't. Among the 9, one stands highest. Not just in power, in purpose. The Witch King of Angmar is not merely a stronger version of the others. He is Sauron's instrument of strategic design. A being who has spent 3,000 years learning exactly how civilizations fail and exactly how to accelerate that failure. In the Second Age, he was the first among the 9, the chief among Sauron's wraith servants when the other 8 were still being drawn into shadow. When the war against the last alliance ended and Sauron's physical form was destroyed and the One Ring passed to Isildur's hand, the Witch King did not disappear. He waited. And in the Third Age, around the year 1300, he reappeared not in Mordor, not at any obvious point of threat, but far in the cold north, in a barren land that most maps left blank. He built there a realm, Angmar. And what he built was not a kingdom in any ordinary sense. It was a weapon aimed at Arnor. Arnor, the northern kingdom sister to Gondor, heir to Númenor's legacy in the north, had already fractured into three smaller realms through its own internal disagreements. Arthedain, Cardolan, Rudor, old rivalries, old wounds. The Witch King did not create those divisions, he found them. And for nearly 700 years he worked them. Not with the hammer of open warfare alone, with the scalpel of strategic pressure. He inflamed old grudges between the three kingdoms. He allied with the hill men of Rudor and used them to destabilize Arnor's eastern flank. He sent agents ahead of his armies, rumors, assassinations, plagues that seemed natural but weren't quite. He let the black breath travel on the wind ahead of his banners so that by the time his armies arrived, the captains they faced had already been breathing despair for a generation. His legend grew faster than his armies moved. Arnor's soldiers were fighting a name as much as a force, and names in the dark of the north are harder to defeat than soldiers. One by one, the three kingdoms fell. Rudor was swallowed. Cardolan was harried into ruin. Arthedain stood until it could stand no longer. When Fornost finally fell, when the last High King of the North was overthrown, it was not a sudden military catastrophe. It was the last stone in a wall the Witch King had been quietly disassembling for 6 centuries. And then he was gone again, south to Minas Morgul to wait. This is the detail that reframes everything. When we first meet Strider in the Prancing Pony, a battered ranger with a hood pulled low and a sword that has seen too much, we are looking at the long tale of one Ringwraith's campaign. The Dunedain wander without a throne because the Witch King took their kingdom from them. Not recently, 3,000 years ago, and the work is still echoing. But the Witch King is not alone in having a story. 8 other shadows stand in that circle of obedience, and Tolkien, who rarely names the nameless without a reason, gives one of them a designation that tells us something important. Commel, the Shadow of the East. The Black Easterling. He is the second most powerful of the 9, and his territory lies not toward Gondor and the west but toward Rhûn, toward those wide, half-mapped eastern lands where the roads run out and cultures exist that Gondor barely knew the names of. He was an eastern king before the ring took him. A ruler of a people who lived beyond the range of Númenorian influence, who worshipped differently and fought differently and feared differently. When Sauron bound him, he bound a specific kind of expertise, knowledge of those eastern peoples, those roads, those languages, knowledge that became a tool. Commel became Sauron's presence in the east, overseer of the vassal peoples, the border governor of the territories between Mordor and Rhûn. But Tolkien gives him one more characteristic that matters enormously to the story we follow in Lord of the Rings. Commel is especially sensitive to the One Ring's presence. When he is close, his awareness sharpens almost unbearably. When he is far, it dims. He is the hunting hound who must be brought near the scent before he can truly track. This is why he is among the riders who prowl the borders of the Shire in those early chapters, who stop at hedges and sniff at the roots of trees, who approach hobbit holes in the dark and ask questions in voices that make the air go cold. He was almost there. He was very nearly the one who found Frodo before Frodo had any idea what was hunting him. The other 7 are nameless to us but not identical. Some were Númenorian lords, men who had built harbors and towers and navigated the great seas. Some were Easterling kings with different histories of power and different categories of desire. One became the specialist in siege warfare, another the terror of cities, another the shadow of Minas Morgul itself. 9 different men, 9 different reasons to accept a ring, 9 different ways to be hollowed out. One identical end. Now here is something the legend of the Nazgûl often obscures: they are not mindless. When Sauron releases them at the start of the War of the Ring, their mission is to find the One Ring. They know a name, Baggins, they know a place, Shire, that is all. They don't know which Baggins, they don't know where Shire is exactly, they don't even know what road to take. So they do something terrifying in its mundanity. They ask around. They ride to old haunts of Gollum, who they have recently questioned and then released to his great regret. They scout the Anduin Vales, they probe forgotten borders, they question Faramir at river crossings, they lean over encounters in Bree with soft, cold voices and ask innkeepers about the roads west, and very carefully, very deliberately, the net tightens. They also build a network. Bill Ferny at Bree's eastern gate watching, the squint-eyed southerner in the Prancing Pony listening, scattered agents along the greenway whose loyalty has been purchased with coin or fear. The Nazgûl cannot be everywhere at once, but their informants can. What emerges is not supernatural omniscience. It is patient, adaptive, methodical intelligence work. They make errors. In the beginning they misjudge the Shire's western approach, arrive too obviously on the east road, lose Frodo at the Buckleberry Ferry when they didn't anticipate the river crossing. But every error is followed by an adjustment. Every dead end becomes information. By the time they converge on Weathertop, they know exactly when Aragorn will be absent. They know the hobbits are exhausted. They time their approach for the deepest hours of darkness. And then 5 of them come, not all 9, just 5, and they nearly end everything right there on that ancient hill under a moonless sky before the Fellowship has even formed. Strip away the cloaks and the mythology, and what you have is an intelligence operation conducted by beings who don't sleep, don't tire, don't lose motivation, and can feel the target's location like a fire on their skin. That should be more terrifying, not less. On Weathertop, the Witch King does not aim for Frodo's life. He aims for something far more permanent than that. The Morgul blade that finds Frodo's shoulder is not a poison knife in any conventional sense. It is a fragment of the unseen realm given physical form, forged for one purpose, singular and terrible: to begin a migration, to sever the victim from the visible world, strand by strand, and draw them across into the shadow where the Nazgûl dwell. The shard left inside Frodo, the fragment that Aragorn finds crumbling in his fingers afterward, is not metal anymore in any meaningful sense. It is a direction, a slow command, moving toward the heart where, if it arrives, the transformation is complete. And Tolkien shows us exactly what that migration feels like from the inside. In the days following Weathertop, Frodo's world changes. Not dramatically at first, colors become slightly less vivid. The voices of his friends seem to come from slightly farther away. Food loses something he can't quite name. The cold that spreads from the wound is not the clean chill of October. It is a dead, inward cold, still and permanent, like ice in a place that was never meant to freeze. And then the pull begins. Toward the Ringwraiths, a pull that is, shamefully, almost familiar. Their presence, once unbearable, physically nauseating with terror, begins to carry a strange undertone, almost comfortable, almost like being called home. This is the most disturbing detail Tolkien gives us. The Morgul blade does not just wound, it recategorizes. It begins to make the victim feel that where the Nazgûl are is where they belong, that the cold gray realm they inhabit is not a horror but a destination. This is exactly what happened to the 9 kings over 3,000 years of wearing their rings. It just happened much faster. Elrond told Frodo plainly if the fragment reached his heart he would have become a wraith. Not dead, a wraith, a lesser echo of the 9, invisible, bound, permanent, hollow, one more serving tool in Sauron's hands. The War of the Ring nearly ended in a hobbit hole in the Shire with a wound that looked almost small. If you want to see what the Nazgûl can do to a place when given enough time, look at Minas Morgul. Once it was Minas Ithil, Tower of the Moon. A fair city of Gondor built where the mountains opened toward Mordor, its white stones catching the silver light of the moon, its gardens climbing the slopes in ordered terraces, its fountains running clear from the mountain springs. Isildur himself dwelt there. This was a watchtower and also a home and also a place of beauty carefully maintained. When the Nazgûl took it, they did not merely conquer a fortress. They inverted a memory. Under their occupation, which stretched across most of the Third Age, the Valley of the Morgul changed, not quickly. The way all truly deep changes happen, so slowly that those who lived nearby could almost convince themselves it was normal. The slopes went gray. The plants that grew on them lost their color and took on a pale, bloated quality, as if feeding on something that wasn't quite light. The river that ran below the city became milky and cold, a water that seemed to leach vitality from anything it touched. Birds stopped coming, ordinary animals avoided the valley. And the city itself, its light was wrong. A pale greenish-white that illuminated without warming, that made living skin look like the skin of the dead and made dead stone seem alive in some unwholesome way, windows like staring eyes, towers that leaned toward you. The black breath concentrated over centuries into a landscape. When Frodo, Sam and Gollum creep along the hidden path above the road, the city awakens as if it senses them. A great host pours from the gates, armies, banners, armor gleaming with that same corpse-light sheen. And then the Witch King rides forth and his cry tears across the valley, a sound that reaches past ears and bones and seems to touch the wool directly. Frodo's hand moves toward the ring. Against his own desperate resistance, his hand moves toward the ring. No blade, no spell, No hand laid upon him, just the presence of a place and the sound of a voice that has been there, accumulating darkness for nearly 2,000 years. After the ford of Bruinen drowns their horses and shatters their first assault, the Nazgûl do not simply regroup on new mounts and resume the same approach. They ascend. Sauron places them upon fell beasts, ancient creatures, Tolkien hints, older than the current age, kin perhaps to the cold and boneless things that haunted the world before men gave the years their names. Their wings are leathery and slow-beating, their necks long and barbed, their smell marsh and cold water and death's patience. This is not a logistical change, it is an evolution of what terror can do. On horseback, the Nazgûl were hunters in the dark, things that slip along hedgerows and riverbanks that approach slowly and quietly and let dread arrive first. In the air, they become banners, visible to thousands at once, their silhouettes crossing the face of the sun above Gondor's walls, their cries falling vertically like spears thrown from impossible height. At the siege of Minas Tirith, the fell beasts are already wheeling before the first assault begins. Tolkien tells us that companies of soldiers break and flee without a blade being drawn simply because the Nazgûl are there above them, circling, the black breath riding down on the wind, the shrieks stripping courage before any physical danger presents itself. Now think about what you would do on those walls. You have been trained, you have a spear, you know your position, you have comrades on either side of you. By every rational measure you should hold. And then that sound comes down from above, that thin, falling note that seems to find the specific frequency at which courage dissolves and your hands begin to shake. And the thought that surfaces is not a tactical assessment. It is something much simpler: I cannot do this. That is the Nazgûl aloft, body and spirit broken simultaneously. The fell beast can tear flesh. The wraith upon its back tears will. Together they make resistance feel not just difficult but meaningless. But they can be stopped. This is the part the legend sometimes forgets. These beings who have haunted 3 millennia of Middle-earth history, they have limits, real ones, things that genuinely diminish them, drive them back, and in the right circumstances break them. Daylight weakens them, their power is greatest in darkness and in deep places. Under a full noon sun, their forms are more uncertain to mortal eyes, their terror or a thinner fog burning off under heat. They move more cautiously in daylight, less willing to press their advantage in the open where courage has a better chance of rallying. Fireworks. On Weathertop, what holds back 5 ringwraiths advancing in a gray ring with blades drawn is not an enchanted sword. It is campfire torches, flaming brands in the hands of a ranger and 4 very frightened hobbits. When Aragorn charges at them with fire in both fists, they fall back. Their cloaks don't like the light. Something in them recognizes fire as the opposite of what they are: concentrated warmth and brightness thrown against the coldness they carry. Encourage, specific, visible, embodied courage, acts like a counterpresence. The Nazgûl's great weapon is the terror they project, but terror requires a receiver. When one person refuses to receive it, when one figure plants their feet and keeps their eyes up and does not flinch, the invisible broadcast finds a gap it cannot get through. Others near that person feel it, not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Aragorn on Weathertop, Gandalf at the gate of Minas Tirith, Glorfindel at the ford. These figures don't defeat the Nazgûl in those moments through superior power alone. They create islands of resistance, places where the terror cannot complete its work and those islands hold. Water can sweep them away, a river can drown their horses. Elrond and Gandalf together called the Bruinen down on them, and the Nazgûl's physical presence in this world required physical things, horses, bodies, equipment, that the flood could destroy. They are powerful, they are persistent, they are ancient and terrible and patient. They are not invincible. But if they can be stopped, if fire and daylight and courage can check them, why do the greatest figures of the age approach them with such profound caution? Consider Gandalf, not a wandering old man with a staff. A Maya, a spirit from before the making of the world, clothed in a body for the purposes of this age. Bearer of Narya, the Ring of Fire, one of the 3 elven rings, an intelligence and a power that predates every kingdom mentioned in these tales. And on Weathertop, Gandalf does not sweep the Nazgûl away with one blazing movement and send them fleeing forever. He fights them through the night. He is driven from hill to hill. He uses lightning and fire and everything available to him. And when you trace his movements in the timeline, you realize he avoids direct confrontation with the 9 whenever possible, not from cowardice, but from a clear-eyed assessment of what a prolonged contest would cost him. If 9 ancient wraiths, each one a corrupted king of men, each one powered by Sauron's will through the One Ring, each one capable of terror as a weapon and the Black Breath as a sustained assault, if all 9 moved on Gandalf together, the outcome would not be certain. Even for him. This is the thing about the Nazgûl's combined presence. Their terror, coordinated and overlapping, creates a pressure that is cumulative. One Nazgûl can be faced and turned. 5 together, as on Weathertop, nearly ended the story before it began. All 9 fully coordinated with the Black Breath at full strength, even an ancient spirit bears that wait carefully. Gandalf's caution is not weakness. It is the clearest possible signal of how seriously the 9 should be taken. Then Glorfindel, an elf lord of the Elder Days, who once fought a Balrog in the mountains above Gondolin, who returned from the west with a power that shines in both seen and unseen. When he rides out from Rivendell, the Nazgûl feel him coming in recoil. But even Glorfindel does not simply ride them down. He uses the river, the timing, the land itself, turning geography into an ally rather than relying on direct confrontation alone. If such beings move this carefully around the 9, what does that mean for everyone else? There is a quiet contrast running through every encounter with the Nazgûl, a pattern that only becomes visible when you step back and look at it whole. Men break the fastest. Hobbits, bewildered and terrified, at least keep moving. Elves barely flinch. But men, the very race from which the 9 were originally drawn, collapse under the weight of their former king's presence with a speed that seems almost predetermined. Why? Part of the answer is about the elves. They are, in Tolkien's world, beings deeply rooted in Arda itself. Their spirits are not thinly tethered to their bodies the way the Nazgûl's are. They are woven into the fabric of the living world. And they carry memories that men lost long ago. They remember Morgoth. They remember the wars of the First Age. They remember what Sauron looked like when he was still being honest about his purposes. For many of them, the Nazgûl are not an unknowable nightmare. They are one more form of an enemy they have been fighting since before the Second Age began. Experience doesn't erase fear, but it can blunt the specific edge of the unknown. When Glorfindel advances on the Nazgûl at the ford and they feel his presence and reel back, they are recognizing something ancient, something that predates their own existence as wraiths, and they know what it means. The part about men is harder, and it gets at something Tolkien was saying that matters beyond the story. Men in his legendarium are meant to be the least afraid of death. Mortality is not their punishment, it is, in the deepest sense, their gift. A chance to leave the world when the time comes, to pass into something unknown that even the Valar cannot fully see. It was supposed to be a door, not a wall. But Sauron spent the Second Age teaching men to fear death above everything, to resent their brief years, to see the elves' longevity not as a different kind of bond but as something stolen from them, something they deserved too. He planted a wound at the center of human consciousness, an obsession with the length of life rather than its content, and then offered rings as bandages. To stand before a Nazgûl as a man is to stand before the mirror image of that wound. These were once men like you, they were afraid to die like you, they accepted power to avoid it like you might, and this, hollow, screaming, enslaved, ancient is what they got. The terror of the Nazgûl for men is not just what they do. It is what they represent. And then there are hobbits, who should, by every reasonable measure, be the first to break. They are small, they have never trained for war. Their entire cultural identity is organized around the comfortable, good food, dry weather, familiar roads, the same fields in the same seasons for generations. They are not built to carry the weight of the world. And yet, 4 hobbits on a lane in the Shire, flat on their faces in the grass, shaking, barely breathing, and when the hoofbeats of the Black Rider fade, they get up. They keep walking. They encounter the Nazgûl again and again over the following weeks and months, and every time the result is the same: they are frightened. They are nearly overwhelmed, and then they take one more step anyway. The key is in what they are afraid of losing. The Nazgûl's terror speaks to specific human fears, the fear of death, of failure, of domination, of meaninglessness, and those fears require certain attachments to work. A person who wants power can be threatened with its loss. A person who fears death can be paralyzed by death's proximity. Hobbits want meals, they want their friends. They want the Shire, the very specific, very particular smell of it after rain, the way the fields look in September, the sound of someone they love moving around in the kitchen. Their dreams are small and intensely specific and almost impossible to threaten with abstract concepts. The Nazgûl's whisper says, "Nothing you do matters, everything will fail, the darkness is inevitable." And the hobbit heart hears this and thinks, yes, well, but Sam packed extra rope, and there's likely to be something worth eating past the next ridge. This is not ignorance, it is a kind of immunity. And at the end, on the Pelennor, in the most catastrophic battle of the age, it is Merry who drives the blade into the Witch King's leg that breaks the ancient sorcery. Not a great warrior, not a trained fighter, a hobbit from the Shire who refused to be left behind. Forged in Westernesse, that blade specifically against the powers of Angmar, the Witch King never knew it was in the field, nobody told him to worry about a hobbit. That's the point. Step back, look at the full picture. The Nazgûl are not merely participants in the War of the Ring, they are the reason the world looks the way it does when the War of the Ring begins. 1,000 years of Angmar, 700 years of systematic pressure on Arnor, carried out by one ringwraith with patience and precision and the Black Breath as an advanced scout. The result, Arnor is gone. The Dunedain of the north are wandering rangers instead of kings. The great northern city of Fornost is a ruin. The road between the Shire and Rivendell passes through land that used to be a flourishing kingdom, and is now just emptiness with weeds growing through the flagstones. When we first see Strider, we are looking at the shadow of the Witch King's campaign, still long across the north after 2,000 years. Minas Morgul, 2,000 years of occupation. Gondor's eastern flank permanently compromised. Ithilien, once beautiful, the garden province of the kingdom, slowly poisoned and emptied. The road through the Morgul Vale functionally impassable. The entire strategic situation of the Third Age shaped by one city turned inside out. The shadow of the East ranging through Rhûn. The Eastern peoples, Easterlings, men of Rhûn, bound to Sauron's service not only through fear of military power but through decades of cultural influence from the Nazgûl who governed those borders. The eastern front of any coalition against Mordor compromised before the first arrow flies. This is what 3,000 years of 9 immortal servants can accomplish. Not just battles won and lost, the very shape of the political world, the distribution of power, the location of trust and its absence, the things people believe are possible and the things they have forgotten to even try. When Gandalf sits in council at Rivendell and maps the problems facing the free peoples of Middle-earth, he is looking at a map that the Nazgûl helped draw. The loneliness of the peoples, the gaps between their realms, the absence of the kind of unified resistance that might have been possible if things had gone differently. Remove the 9 from this history and you do not just remove 9 villains from a story. You remove the force that spent an age making the story as hard as possible to win. Here is the question that haunts every encounter with the Nazgûl once you've started asking it. Is anyone still in there? Tolkien is clear that the 9 are enslaved, their wills bent fully to Sauron's through the One Ring, unable to resist his commands, instruments rather than agents. But the story keeps giving us glimpses that something more specific than simple puppetry is happening. The Witch King is not interchangeable with the other 8. He commands, he adapts, he reads military situations with the intelligence of someone who has been doing this for 3,000 years and has learned from every mistake. Kamal has his particular sensitivity, his specific role, his orientation toward the east that reflects a life lived there before the ring took him. These are roles, not reflexes. And then there is what happens when they encounter Glorfindel. They don't just stop, they recoil. They retreat with something that looks very much like recognition, the recognition of a power older than they are, older than their service to Sauron, older than the rings they wear. Something in them remembers. Once, these were men who might have heard the old tales of Gondolin, who might have stood on a hillside and watched the banners of Gil-galad moving across the plain. Their minds, whatever is left of them, still know what it means when something that old and that bright turns its face toward you. Now hold that thought and push it further. Imagine a consciousness that has been watching its own hands do things it cannot stop for 3,000 years, every Morgul blade, every terror deliberately inflicted, every city sacked, every kingdom broken, watching, present, unable to intervene in its own actions. That is one reading of what wraithhood means. Tolkien himself gives us this possibility through the broader pattern of his world. Gollum is still partially Smeagol. The hobbit he once was survives in fragments, waging a continuous losing battle against the ring's influence. Saruman begins as genuine wisdom and ends as a voice that can only mimic the power it craves. These are stories of gradual erosion, not clean replacement. The Nazgûl may be the same trajectory carried to its absolute terminus, not mindless, imprisoned, aware of every mile traveled and every wrong done and completely unable to choose otherwise. That would make them not just frightening. That would make them the most tragic figures in Middle-earth. Gandalf understood something about the Nazgûl that most people miss in the spectacle of their confrontations. He never fought them when he didn't have to. On Withertop, where the evidence suggests he held the hill against them through a long night of lightning and fire, he was not trying to destroy them. He was trying to buy time, to draw their attention away from the road, to make them fight on open ground in full light rather than let them move quietly in darkness toward 4 hobbits who had no idea how close the 9 already were. It was a distraction operation, not a duel, and it worked exactly as intended. Outside Minas Tirith, when the Witch King rides up to the Shattered Gate, that is different. There Gandalf plants himself precisely because the alternative is worse. If the Lord of the Nazgûl enters the city with the gate broken and no one standing to oppose him, the collapse of courage inside those walls is complete. The last defenders of Gondor needed to see someone choose to stand. Gandalf could provide that, so he did. 2 different situations, 2 different calculus. The same guiding principle: spend your strength where it matters most, not where it feels most heroic. And what does Gandalf do at the height of that confrontation when the Witch King is before him and the hour seems to hang in the balance? He turns away. Pippin's cry reaches him. A hobbit, a dying steward, a moment of mercy more important than a clash of powers at the gate. Because Gandalf's actual mission is not to defeat the Nazgûl in single combat. It is to keep hope alive in the hearts of the people who will have to do the actual work. Narya, the ring of fire that Círdan gave him when he first arrived in Middle-earth, is not a weapon. Its power is kindling, strengthening the hearts of the weary, reminding the discouraged that resistance is worth continuing. That is Gandalf's counterpart to the Black Breath, not fire and lightning, but the specific act of making it slightly less impossible to keep going. And then comes the day. Mount Doom, the crack of the world, Frodo at the edge. The Nazgûl are in the air over Mordor. Fell beasts wheeling in the ash-smoke sky, circling lower and lower, drawn by the same gravity that has been pulling them toward the ring since they first rode out of Mordor weeks ago. They are closing. The ring is there, almost within reach, and everything the Witch King has worked toward for 3,000 years is. It falls into the fire, unmade. And in the same instant, Barad-dûr begins to fall. The tower whose foundations go back across 2 ages of the world shudders from root to crown. The great eye which has been the organizing principle of every army. Every campaign, every Nazgûl movement across the continent wavers, stretches thin as smoke, and collapses inward on a darkness that has nothing left to hold it together. The Nazgûl feel it. Their fell beasts falter. Something that was structural, something that was the architecture of their very existence, has been removed from beneath them. They were never independent entities. They were extensions of one will, tethered to one ring, powered by one source, and that source has just been destroyed at its origin. For a heartbeat they hang in the sky, black shapes against red, as if the story has been yanked out from underneath them. Then they burned. Not with ordinary fire, with unmaking. The cloaks, the crowns, the gray hands in mail gauntlets, these were only the outermost layer of what existed. The wraith forms beneath, which had been accumulating in the unseen for 3,000 years, are stripped bare. 9 pale, screaming shapes that were once kings of men, briefly revealed, briefly present, and then gone. 9,000 years of dread dissolved in moments. No last stand, no redemption, no final words, just silence and the smell of ash and the mountain opening beneath them. Far away in the Shire, a kettle is boiling. Someone is laughing in a sunlit lane. They will never know what sound just stopped. But the silence that follows is not empty. After the 9 are gone, what remains? The houses of healing still hold the memory of the Black Breath in the hands of the healers who learned to fight it. The ruins of Arnor still trace the shape of the Witch King's campaign in the north, empty cities, crumbling towers, the long grass growing over roads that once connected a kingdom. The Valley of the Morgul will be cleansed eventually, Tolkien tells us. But the cleansing takes time. The wounds of 2,000 years of occupation do not close overnight. And in the minds of those who survived, the soldiers who fought on the Pelennor, the rangers who walked those haunted roads, the hobbits who hid in the grass and listened to hooves coming closer in the dark, the 9 leave traces. Not permanent, not binding, but traces. Children in the 4th age will hear tales of the Black Riders. Travelers on the road north will feel, crossing through what used to be Arnor, a particular quality of emptiness that seems to go deeper than mere absence of population. Healers will study the black breath for generations, because knowing how to pull someone back from the edge of a gray despair that makes living feel pointless turns out to be knowledge worth keeping. The Nazgûl are gone, their tools are ash, their fell beasts are rotting somewhere in the ash fields of Mordor. But despair, the specific category of wound they inflicted, is not unique to them. It will be back, in new shapes, without the mythology. And the remedies will remain relevant. Athela's fellowship, someone who refuses to let go of your hand and keeps saying your name even when you can't quite remember why it matters that you have one. The houses of healing did not close when the ring fell. So what do we take from them? When you look at the Nazgûl whole, from their beginning as proud kings accepting a gilded offer through their centuries of slow erosion, into their final form as hollow servants of an ancient will, what you're seeing is Tolkien's deepest warning dressed in the most frightening clothes he could find. The warning is not about dark magic or cursed objects. It is about a particular kind of fear, the fear of loss, the fear of ending, the fear that what you have built will not survive you, and what happens when you allow that fear to make your decisions for you. The Nine Kings were not villains by nature. They were rulers who wanted more time, who wanted their work to continue, who wanted in the most human way imaginable to matter for longer than a human life allows. And that wanting, which was not wrong in itself, was exploited with precise and patient cruelty until it became the lever that moved them entirely out of their own lives and into someone else's. They are what happens when the fear of an ending makes you accept an existence that isn't really life. And against them, Tolkien places not the most powerful figures he could imagine, but the smallest, the most ordinary, the ones who had the least to prove and the simplest reasons to keep going. A hobbit who wanted to go home. A shield maiden who refused to be left behind. A ranger who had been waiting 3,000 years to be what he was always supposed to be and never stopped believing it was possible. The courage in The Lord of the Rings is never the absence of fear. It is the decision to move through fear rather than be stopped by it. It is the small, private, often silent choice to take one more step even when the black breath is in the air and the hoofbeats are getting closer and every reasonable instinct is screaming to sit down in the dust and give up. The Nazgûl cannot touch that choice. For all their ancient power, for all their 3,000 years, for all the kingdoms they broke and the hope they dimmed, they cannot reach the moment between the terror and the step. That moment belongs to the person living it. It always has. One more image to carry with you. The Shire, late evening, the war is over, the nine are gone, the age has turned. A lane between hedges, mud from recent rain, the smell of growing things that have never known the black breath. A hobbit walking home with a lantern, cloak pulled around his shoulders, boots caked at the heel. He is not a hero, he doesn't appear in the histories. He wasn't at Pelennor or Weathertop or the gates of Minas Tirith. He spent the war quietly, feeding chickens, tending a garden, watching the horizon with the specific anxiety of someone who knows very little about what is happening on the other side of it. He has a round green door at the end of this lane. He turns the key, the door opens, inside, firelight, a worn chair, the kettle just beginning to sing. He steps in. The door closes with a soft final click. And the ancient darkness, the darkness that rode on fell beasts through red skis, the darkness that whispered kings into hollow obedience, the darkness that turned a fair city into a place of corpselight and rot, cannot follow him here. It never could. The small warm room, the simple life, the kettle, the chair. These are the things the Nazgûl hunted across half the world to destroy, and these are the things that outlasted them. Not by being invincible. By refusing to believe that the darkness had the final word. Until the next road, until the next fire, until the next shadow that turns out when you look at it clearly to be smaller than the light you're already carrying.